From the City of Angels off the Pacific Ocean, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be across the nation, around the world. I'm George Norrie, and welcome to Coast AM. Next hour, Forbidden Archaeology and Human Devolution with Michael Cremo. Get ready for that. While residents of low-lying towns stacked sandbags or grabbed belongings and evacuated as a foot of rain pushed rivers over their banks in the nation's midsection, at least 13,000 deaths have been linked to the weather, and 3 people were missing. Record or near-record flood crests forecast in several towns in Missouri. Flooding was reported in large areas of Arkansas and parts of southern Illinois, southern Indiana, and southwestern Ohio. In a moment, we bring in Robert Felix, the author of Not by Fire, But by Ice. He still believes we are in the beginning stages of an ice age. A Michigan congressman wants to put a 50-cent tax on every gallon of gasoline to try to cut back on your consumption. Polls show that a majority of Americans support policies that would reduce greenhouse gases. But when it comes to paying for it, it's a different story. Representative John Dingell of Michigan wants to help cut consumption with a gas tax, but some just don't agree with this idea, according to a new poll. The poll, scheduled to be released on Thursday, shows that 48% don't support paying even a penny more. 28% would pay up to 50 cents more, and 10% would pay more than 50 cents, and then the rest, 8%, would pay more than $1. A new statement attributed to al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden condemns European countries for siding with the United States in Afghanistan and for allowing the publication of cartoons considered insulting to Islam's prophet, Muhammad. Mocking Islam's founder violates, they say, the etiquettes of dispute and fighting, warned the voice attributed to bin Laden. He said Muslims have not responded by mocking Jesus, whom they consider a prophet as well. Analysis of previous statements has indicated that bin Laden was the speaker, and a U.S. intelligence official said no reason to think the recorded voice was not bin Laden. President Bush used the 5th anniversary of the start of the war in Iraq to make the case for persevering in a conflict that could have many more anniversaries. Democrats accused him of lacking a strategy to win and withdraw. The president, speaking before members of the armed forces and defense officials at the Pentagon, said in his frankest acknowledgement that the costs of the war in lives and money had been higher and longer lasting than he had anticipated. But he remained unwavering in his insistence that the invasion of Iraq, which began in March of 2003, had made the world better and the United States safer. However, according to the most recent poll just released, 5 years after the U.S.-led invasion of Iraq, President Bush now faces extremely low approval ratings as he reaffirmed his commitment to accept no outcome but victory in the war. Just 31% of Americans approve of how President Bush is handling his job. Douglas Hagman, Homeland Security U.S., not part of Homeland Security, on the line with us as we talk about this issue. And, of course, another new voice message in from probably bin Laden. Douglas, do you think?
I do believe so, George. Thanks for having me on your program.
Sure thing.
Indeed, a 5-minute, 3-second audio recording was released today of Osama bin Laden through or by Sahab Media Productions, the media wing of al-Qaeda, and it certainly sounds like bin Laden. Unique in timing, though, I would say, from an investigative standpoint. And if one would look at this like a criminal case, I find the timing interesting, and I find the content of the message rather interesting as well. Whereas he takes this moment in time, the 5th anniversary of the U.S.-led coalition in Iraq, to mention or to make topic about the Danish cartoon controversy.
He seems to be implying, Douglas, that something is looming over the horizon.
Yes, indeed. A rather cryptic statement he issued, saying that it's not going to be what will be heard, but what we will see. In other words, there is some sort of indication that the reckoning for this will be more severe, he states. But there's an indication here of some sort of perhaps attack in the works or attacks in the works because of this, purportedly because of the controversy of the cartoons.
All right, Douglas, thanks for the update. Appreciate it, my friend. Douglas Hagman. A carbon-containing molecule has been detected for the very first time on a planet outside of our solar system. The organic compound methane was found in the atmosphere of a planet orbiting a star some 63 light-years away. Water has been found in its atmosphere, but scientists say the planet is far too hot to support life. This discovery, unveiled in the journal Nature, is an important step towards exploring new worlds that might be more hospitable. Methane, made up of carbon and hydrogen, is the simplest possible organic compound. In New York, the mastermind of a scheme to plunder corpses from funeral homes in the Southeast and then sell them for millions of dollars has pleaded guilty in a deal that could send him to prison for more than 5 decades. The 44-year-old former oral surgeon confessed to the judge that he carried out the scheme from 2001 to 2005. He will face 18 to 54 years and will have to forfeit nearly $5 million. He pleaded guilty to 14 counts that include enterprise corruption, body stealing, and reckless endangerment. The plea was made more than 2.5 years after the gruesome scandal broke, with evidence that corpses were being hacked up without permission or proper screening for diseases and sold for dental implants, knee and hip replacements, and other procedures around the country. And if you think it's tough here for health care, things are really bad everywhere else. A German retiree is taking a hospital to court after she went in for a leg operation and ended up, and I kid you not, with a new rectum. The woman woke up to find out that she had been mixed up with another patient who was suffering the other problem. The clinic in Bavaria has since suspended the surgical team. Now the woman is planning to sue the hospital. She still needs the leg operation and is searching for another hospital to do it. And also in other stories, too, you hear a woman who had a cancerous kidney went to get it replaced. Doctors took out the healthy kidney by mistake. Unbelievable. Well, in a moment, Robert Felix joins us, not by fire, but by ice. He's next on Coast to Coast AM. Well, you know him as the author of the book, Not by Fire, but by Ice, Robert Felix. Wonderful guest here on Coast to Coast. Hello, Robert. How are you?
Hi, George.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you for having me on.
So what's going on in the Midwest, Robert? Severe weather these days.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah, the flooding is there and the record snow. The amount of snow this winter has been phenomenal. We've had record snow in Wisconsin and in Ohio, in Indiana, in Michigan, record snow in Kentucky and Vermont and New Hampshire, California, Pennsylvania, Alaska. I mean, it goes on and on.
I thought we were in global warming.
Well, I guess you know what I think of that, but
Yeah.
No, this is what I've been saying for years. It's coming, and it's beginning to get a little bit scary out there.
And there's severe weather this time, Robert. I mean, Atlanta over the weekend, Friday starting, hit with tornadoes downtown. I mean, just an incredible situation. All throughout the country these days. 5 people die in a highway wreck and heavy rain in Kentucky. Searchers in Missouri looking for bodies. 13 deaths, maybe more reported. The Missouri governor seeks federal disaster aid. 70 counties declared a disaster area. I mean, this is tough stuff.
It is, and in Montreal, we don't hear much about Canada, but Montreal on Friday, they shut down their schools and sent 90,000 kids home because a couple of buildings, not schools, but one store collapsed and killed people in the store. And they really hadn't been watching, I guess, but their schools had snow on them measuring from 6 feet deep to 9 feet deep. And all it would have taken is a little bit of rain to put weight on those, and there would have been some disasters. So it's happening. Right now, Montreal is within 13 inches of breaking its all-time record for the amount of snow.
Outside of St. Louis, where I'm headed soon, the Merrimack River is threatening towns. Eureka Valley Park, I know those areas well. I mean, these people can't sustain too much more water in these areas.
No, George, there's another thing that I'm really concerned about. In my book, one of the things I say is that we'll be fighting in the streets for food long before we're covered with ice. And I'm beginning to see more and more occasions where food supplies. Well, look at China this year. My gosh, China in the last month has had 485,000 houses collapse because of the weight of the snow. They've had their food supplies destroyed. My understanding is, in South America and Ecuador, is that the banana supplies are gone. It's just happening around the world, not just here.
Well, what's going to happen? Because we can't fix it. We can't change it.
No.
What do we do?
Well, you were mentioning earlier, I heard you talking about some legislator wants to raise gasoline taxes.
John Dingell out of Michigan.
How crazy. Right when we're going to need it the most. Of course, we're still being told it's global warming. Just two days ago, the United Nations, the IPCC, came out saying that the ice in Antarctica or ice worldwide is melting. Well, it's deceptive because they're using figures from 2 years ago. And here we're sitting here now with record snow across the northern hemisphere, not just the United States, record snow across the northern hemisphere, which will translate into growing ice. So I don't know why we're being given this deceptive information, but that's what we're getting.
Did you see where China, which is, of course, holding the Olympics this year, built a stadium without a dome, and they will be right in the middle of their monsoon season? And some people are speculating that the Chinese government isn't concerned because they know how to control the weather. Did you hear about that?
No, I did not hear about that, and I doubt it very much.
You never know.
Okay.
Get rid of those clouds. Hey, if they can control monsoons, they're onto some kind of high technology.
They are. If they can control them, then where are they going to go? Because that moisture is up there in the sky, so it's got to go somewhere.
Okay, so here, listen to this. Let's pull out our calculators here. In Arkansas and in Missouri, they got, and in some areas of Illinois, they got, let's say, up to a foot of rain, 12 inches of rain.
Wow.
That's 120 inches of snow.
That's what it would be.
10 feet, 12, 10 feet of snow.
That could happen very easily if it had have come just, a month earlier?
Yeah.
When it was a little cooler?
10 feet of snow.
That would cover what? That would cover, how tall is a trailer truck? You must have somebody out there driving a trailer truck right now. How tall are those rigs?
Oh, they're probably at least 10 feet tall.
Yeah, so you might see a little bit of it sticking up above the freeway. But that would cover, 10 feet would certainly cover a one-story house.
The roof of a house would collapse with 10 feet of snow on top of it, wouldn't it?
Oh my gosh, yes. I remember...
They're not built for that.
No. Well, most roofs aren't built for even 1 foot of snow if it rains. So that's where you get the real problem, is you get the snow on there, and then a little bit of rain, which doesn't run off, it just starts building that weight up.
And then it freezes.
It doesn't even have to freeze. It just builds up the weight, and it gets so much weight that the roof can't handle it.
Soggy snow, and then bang.
Yeah, that's another thing I say in the book is that you'd want to be beefing up your roofs. And I think after this winter, well, certainly in China, all of that snow in China, it's a long ways from us. We don't really know, but the snow that they had that collapsed all of those houses was the same latitude as Miami, Florida.
Don't you sometimes want to just sit back, get your favorite bottle of wine on a nice night, and bring it on?
Well, I enjoy it. I was born and raised in Vermont. I like snow, so I can't say that I dislike it. I like it. I like skiing, but too much of it can get a little bit carried away.
What's new with the author of the book, Not by Fire but by Ice?
Well, working on another book that I shouldn't have even brought that up. Can't talk about it too much yet, but working on another one, and still continuing to watch what's going on with everything worldwide with this weather, and getting ready to take a trip to London and Paris and talk with some of the people there that have been contacting me by email and keeping track of the website.
Well, they say the weather in London could get bad at any time, too, so be careful when you're out there.
Okay, I'll do that.
Robert, you going to stick around for some phone calls when we come back? Okay. Now, as you predicted a long time ago on this program that we would be in the early stages of an ice age, there are some climatologists I talk to who aren't throwing that idea out the window anymore.
Right.
They would have a few years ago, but they aren't anymore. What's going on?
There are a lot of climatologists, actually. There's a climatologist, Cliff Harris. He's ranked as one of the top 10 climatologists in the world. He believes that we could be headed into an ice age. There are a lot of scientists that are coming out now, and the big part of it is the sunspots, is the lack of sunspots. And I don't know whether you've heard much about that or not.
Yeah, we had a lot a few years ago, but we've made that cycle change. Isn't this interesting, though, Robert, that all this seems to be coming right in line with December 21, 2012, the Mayan calendar date?
It does. And, when I wrote Not by Fire, but by Ice, I hate to admit this, I was not aware of that. But
until you listen to this program.
That is right, really. Until people started calling in and telling me about it. And I'm still not basing it on the Mayan calendar, but I'm not saying that is wrong. The Mayans may have known something that we don't know.
Well, I got to tell you, the way things have been going, I'm beginning to think that you, Robert Felix, might be right.
Well, thank you. It's and it has to do, I'm not the only one saying this, it has to do with what's called precession of the equinoxes, which it's not my discovery, it's just something that I'm bringing to people's attention. But there is a cycle to ice ages. There was a study done back in the 1970s by a group called CLIMAP, Climate Long Range Investigation, Mapping, and Prediction, where they looked at deep sea cores, and they found that ice ages have begun or ended, just like clockwork, approximately every 11,500 years. And it's tied to something that's called precession of the equinoxes. It's a totally natural cycle. It's nothing that humans have anything to do with. We can't control it. And from what I can see, we're just following that cycle right now.
Our buddy Tony from Ontario in Canada writes us and says, Robert should see the snow in Quebec City, 12 to 14 feet high snowbanks.
Wow.
And some of it probably pushed, but that's pretty darn high.
Yes, I guess there are some Quebec cities, and I think maybe Montreal in some areas, but they have some areas where they've been stacking the snow. They take it there and dump it 8 stories high, and they're not sure it will be melted by the time of next winter.
Looks almost like the cover on your book, Not by Fire, but by Ice.
Yes, it is. Yes,
you still won't tell me what city that is, will you?
Well, I don't know.
Yes, you do. You came up. You're the author of the book.
Well, it's a composite, but
looks like Chicago to me.
But I had a geologist in New York who thought it was New York City, and he emailed me and complained because he said my book cover is wrong. The ice should be 3 times deeper than I show it.
Deeper?
Deeper. Yeah.
Because you had it coming up to these skyscrapers. You're saying that should be over it.
Oh, yes, it should. Well, and, I think of Seattle during the last ice age. Seattle was covered with 4/5 of a mile of ice.
Reminds me of that movie AI, right at the end. Do you remember that? Classic. Underneath, I don't want to disclose it in case somebody hasn't seen it. Well, Robert, you stick with us. What's the website, my friend?
IceAgeNow.com.
IceAgeNow.com. Okay, we're going to take some weather-related questions with our special guest tonight, Robert Felix, author of the book, Not by Fire, but by Ice. We'll give you the numbers in just a second. Final half hour is you and Robert Felix, and I'll come along for the ride. Well, next hour, Michael Cremo joins us. Forbidden Archeology, Human Devolution. He believes mankind hundreds of millions of years older than most people think. And welcome back. We're with Robert Felix. We're going to take your phone calls as well. Robert, I guess the bottom line here is that we can't stop it. We just have to adjust and live with it, right?
Yes, and that's one of the things, that I've been saying to people is I suggest that, and I don't sell food, but I do suggest that they have a supply of food, because I see as if the sunspots do the way they've been doing, during the last little ice age in the 1600s, there was a time called the Maunder Minimum when there were no sunspots, and we went into a little ice age. And then there was a different time when we had no sunspots called the Dalton Minimum, and we went into a little ice age. And there are several scientists who've published who have been predicting that we're headed into another period of no sunspots, which would lead us into that same thing, which during the last one in England, for instance, what happened is that the winter, it rained longer, so the farmers couldn't plant their fields till 5 weeks later than normal, and it ended up that millions of people, literally millions, died of starvation. And I'd love to see people starting to stockpile. I know that's a dirty word to some people, but at least have a supply of food.
That's a smart one, though. Smart one indeed. Let's go to the phones. Wildcard line. Dave, you're on the air with us. Hi, Dave.
Hey, George. My name's Dave. I'm calling out of St. Louis, Missouri. Listening to you on the Big 550 KTRS.
Absolutely. Did you get hit with much rain out there?
You know what? We got down south near Farmington. They were saying got about 6 to 12.
Yeah, they got a lot, but the St. Louis area didn't get much, did it?
We got hit pretty hard for a good few hours, but it not nearly as bad as the surrounding areas.
Okay, go ahead, David.
Well, I had a question for Robert. I know you're not a big supporter in the theory of global warming.
For sure.
And myself included, I think it's more of a fear tactic. But what do you have to say to the people out there who just think that these harsh winters and these amazing amounts of snow are just an off-brand effect of global warming?
Well, I think that the global warming people have done a really good job of positioning themselves, because they've made it so that no matter whether it gets warmer or colder, they're going to blame it on global warming. And no matter whether there's snow or not, they're going to blame it. All I can look at is say that there is a cycle to ice ages. It's known as the Milankovitch cycle. I don't know of any geologist in the world who would argue with this cycle. It's there in the record. This is part of the cycle. And if the global warming computer models would have this cycle entered in their computers, we'd be getting an entirely different story. But Dave, as far as what to say, I don't know. There's a lot of people that I talk to, global warming has become almost like a religion, and it really doesn't make any difference what I say.
Well, a good point. Just a kind of quick follow-up. In the cycles, have they had tendency to have warmer, hotter summers in some parts before the real cold and the real the ice hits?
Yes, I've got and I don't remember exactly where it is right now, but I do have a chart on my website that goes back for 500,000 years, and about every 100,000 years, temperatures warm up just like they're doing right now. They warm up, and then wham! We suddenly descend into an ice age, and this has happened about every 105,000 years. And again, it's a natural cycle. It's tied to what's called orbital stretch. Is that our orbit around the sun is not a perfect circle; it's elliptical, and so sometimes we're further away from the sun than others. Well, the orbit is not only elliptical, but it changes. So sometimes our orbit is close to a circle, sometimes it's elliptical. It takes approximately 105,000 years to go from an ellipse to a circle and back to an ellipse again. And ice ages, the really major ice ages, line up with that cycle, with orbital stretch. So that's where we are right now. We are right at the cusp of where we should be turning the corner and heading back down.
What's going on with the ocean currents, Robert?
Well, I've been saying that's one of the things I say in the book is talking about the underwater volcanoes heating the seas.
Yep.
Now, and so that's what I think has been heating them. And now I understand that we've just heard in the last couple of days that they're cooling again. I don't know why. I've got to do some studying on that.
That's a reversal.
Yeah, and I don't know what's going on. That's not what I expected. So I can't answer that one right now.
All right, next up, let's go to our west of the Rockies. Hi there, Teresa. You're on the air with us.
Hi, good evening, George and Robert.
Hi, Teresa.
Hi. I have a question. When the global warming buzz started quite a few years ago, the established scientific community was in denial. No, it's perfectly normal. Now everyone's on the global warming bandwagon, and we've had this supposedly aberrant winter. So I'm curious, how many cold winters will it take before we go publicly from global warming to global cooling?
Publicly, I don't know. There's a lot of money involved now in believing in global warming, and a lot of state legislators who want to start taxing this. It's an excuse. I know in Washington State they want to start putting taxes on bridges and on the freeways to fight global warming. It's a way to raise money.
Yeah.
But I've seen articles by scientists this year who, we talk about the record cold and we talk about the record snow around the northern hemisphere, and they say, oh, well, this is not unprecedented. Well, for some reason I thought that's what the word record meant. I don't know. Right now, the public, the global warming group has done a wonderful job of putting out their beliefs that, I certainly think are lies, but the people I talk to, unfortunately, I'd say that the vast majority do believe it right now.
Yeah, it seems so, and especially living where I live, the summers are pretty deadly, which brings one more question with your forbearance. If we have actually dipped more into a global cooling cycle, then can I expect, or those of us who live in the desert Southwest, can we expect to see a cooler summer, or do you think it'll be pretty much temperatures as normal?
You might see a couple degrees lower, but you won't notice much. The main thing that happened in the American Southwest during the last ice age is that it was rainier.
We have had a rainy winter this year.
Well, this will take time, but if the sunspot cycle that I'm talking about is correct, if that's what we're basing it on, then that could be. We wouldn't get into the heart of that for another 20 years, but I think that we're looking at a lot more. I think we're looking at the 11,500-year cycle, and people have laughed because they say, well, it takes 1,000 years to go into an ice age, but no, every ice age in the last 250,000 years, once it begins, it goes from temperatures as warm as today or even warmer into full-fledged glacial severity in less than 20 years.
Jeez. Robert, we've got a lot of chat rooms that listen to this program on a regular basis, and one of them, of course, nighthawkzone.com. They put up a banner every night depicting the topic of the night, which will be Michael Cremo when he joins us next hour about forbidden archaeology. Well, this one shows, and this is where you come in, it shows an ancient underground area, city, with many of its artifacts and structures underwater, and it's pretty darn eerie. And I got to tell you, now when the people constructed those structures, built them, They didn't anticipate that they'd be 20 or 30 or 40 feet underwater. What happened to them?
Well, but I absolutely believe it, because during the last ice age, there was so much ice accumulated in Canada and in the north. I mean, almost all of Canada was covered with 2 miles of ice, and sea levels were 370 feet lower than they are now. So there would have been major cities out there that are now covered. The Bering Strait, which is only 270 feet below sea level, that was above water. There was a land bridge from the United States, from Siberia to Alaska. So I absolutely believe that those pictures of underwater cities are possible.
Okay, let's go to our East of the Rockies line. Les, you're on the air with us. Hi there.
Hi, George. Welcome to foggy South Dakota.
You got it, Les. Thanks. And you are driving through it, no doubt. Yes.
Well, yeah.
All right.
Hey, just to enlighten you, most trailers that you're talking about are 13'6".
13.6, okay.
Except for mine, I'm 14 high.
So if you had 10 feet of snow, then you'd have 4 feet of that trailer sticking up.
Yep.
You probably wouldn't be driving very fast.
Well, no, I'd probably hope I was home.
Yeah. Wow.
Anyway, he's talking about record snow across the Midwest. How come South Dakota don't ever get lucky?
Do you want record snow?
I want snow.
Okay. Well, during the last ice age, I think South Dakota had quite a bit of it, didn't they? I'm trying to remember. I'm going to go to my ice age map right now and just see. But actually, you weren't too bad. The snow. There were ice cliffs on the north side of the Missouri River, but on the south side of the Missouri River, you could have lived there.
That would work.
Yeah.
I live in the Black Hills, but we need moisture out there real bad. So.
Yeah, I think it's the jet stream, and as these things happen, the jet stream changes. So it's pretty hard to predict where it'll happen.
Okay, well, that's all I got for you guys. Y'all have a good night.
All right, thanks, Les. You know, they're talking about Lake Mead receding, getting lower and lower and lower. Why don't we? I wish we could move these assets around of water where, you know, Atlanta finally got some. I don't know what it did to Lake Lanier, which was running dry, but sure would be nice to get this foot of rain over into like Lake Mead. That would sure take care of a problem or two, wouldn't it?
Oh, wouldn't that be nice if we could control that? But, you know, I don't know anyway. But, you know, you were mentioning earlier about the Chinese that think they can control it. It'd be wonderful if we could, but I doubt it.
One day we will have, I think, a pipe system throughout this country piping water to various cities from other cities and towns. More so than we have now, of course.
That would be good. Yeah, you know, we look at what happens during the last ice age. If you have any listeners in Utah, for instance, but the Great Salt Lake during the ice age was 1,100 feet deep. If you fly into, if you got a Salt Lake City listener, it'd be interesting, but if you fly into Salt Lake City and you look 1,100 feet up on the mountainside, you'll see the terrace there where the lake used to be. And as we head into the ice age, I think you'll start to see more and more rain occurring there, more rain than can evaporate, and you'll see that lake start to grow deeper.
Do you know where the home of the late Buddy Holly is?
No, I don't.
It's Lubbock, Texas, and that's where we're going right now. Wildcard line Jay, you're up with us. Hi there.
Hey, it's Jay calling from Lubbock, Texas. How you guys doing tonight?
Doing well, thanks.
It's a pleasure to speak both with you, Robert, and with you, George. I had a couple questions for you. First, I wanted to say I was one of these people that fell in line with this global warming nonsense that they're spouting now. I don't know how much longer they're going to be able to ride this out, especially with what's going on now.
What got you to switch?
Well, I tell you, you watch these discovery programs, and of course, when Al Gore came out with his video, of course, I rated it, and they throw a lot of these facts at you, or what they're saying are facts, and it's sensory overload. You get all this information at one time, and you see these charts and these graphs, and you look at it and you think, okay, well, this makes sense. And then you come back out of that, you look at what's going on today, and, you know, they'll only be able to ride it out for so much longer. I mean, the American public isn't stupid. There's just way too much for us to look at now and see to start questioning what they're saying. But my question for you both tonight was, I'm listening to the program, and I'm listening to you, Robert, talking about this cycle and the time frame that we're looking at. And, I mean, it's nothing short of cataclysmic, I mean, what we're talking about as far as with the food supply and so forth. But I wanted to see what you guys thought about how this ties in with the Mayan calendar and the December 12th, 2012 thing, and kind of get your thoughts on that and see what, I mean, is this something, especially with what, George, what you brought up a moment ago about them finding these ruins that were literally underwater. Are we looking at something that may be tied in together, and is this something that they're talking about? Or
I think, Jay, the Mayan calendar in that date has to do with some kind of celestial event, probably, my opinion, a solar event. I think the Mayans knew something. They knew the clock of the sun, and the sun is going to be doing some of the things that Robert Felix has just said. You know, the sunspots go away. It's a cycle, and it has a tremendous effect on our weather. In those days, Robert Felix, it was the weather. It was the, looking at the stars that got these ancient civilizations, doing what they did. That's how they reacted. That's how they put together their entire civilizations.
Yes.
I think things happened with the sun then, and they predicted because of timing it would happen now. And I think 2012, and if they're accurate, something's going to happen then.
I think it's possible. When I talk about the precession of the equinoxes, just to tell anybody what that is right now our Earth, we're tilted at 22.5 degrees rather, and that, how would I explain that? If you put a stick all the way through the Earth, that would be our axis of rotation. Right now, that stick would point toward the star Polaris.
Mm-hmm.
But it slowly rotates like a top.
Right.
And because if you spin a top, you'll notice it never is straight up and down. It's always tilted as it rotates. Well, our axis of rotation, which now points towards Polaris, slowly makes a circle so that 11,500 years from now, it points towards the star Vega. Then 11,500 years from that, it's back to pointing to Polaris again. I think, and, I don't know, this is my contribution, but I think as we make that full circle, our magnetic field all of a sudden no longer aligns with the solar system. And I think something has to give. I think there's a zapping or whatever. That's when I believe that's why our magnetic field reverses, because there is a cycle to magnetic reversals and excursions that matches that same cycle. And as near as I can tell, we're due for that. So whether it's in 2012, I don't know, but I'm not discounting it.
Well, spring starts the first day of spring starts on Thursday, so it's here in some cities. It's ready to go, coming in like a lion already.
Well, yeah, and I guess in Minnesota, there's going to be snow for Easter. So
that's true, and Easter comes early. Robert Felix, thanks for being on the program.
George, I appreciate you having me on.
Robert Felix, great guest on Coast to Coast, not by fire, but by... Just how old is mankind, and how did he evolve, or how did he, according to Michael Cremo, devolve? Michael Cremo is next on Coast to Coast AM. Michael Cremo, member of the History of Science Society, the World Archaeological Congress, the Philosophy of Science Association, and the European Association of Archaeologists. He's also a research associate in history and philosophy of science for the Bhaktivedanta Institute. After receiving a scholarship to study international affairs at George Washington University, Michael began to study the ancient histories of India, known as the Vedas. In this way, he has broadened his academic knowledge with spirituality from the Eastern tradition. Our special guest tonight on Coast to Coast, Michael Cremo. Hey, Michael, welcome back. How are you?
Oh, it's great to be with you, George, and with all your listeners.
Always a pleasure. I just love this topic with you, Michael. And, the more I get into it, the more I realize, I think you're right. I think mankind might have been around much longer than people think. Why has modern science, anthropology especially, why has it aged man not as old as what you believe we to be?
Well, I believe it's because they favor a purely materialistic explanation of how human beings and other life forms came into existence. They believe that maybe 2 billion years ago there were just chemicals floating around the Earth's ocean, and they believe that somehow or other these chemicals combined together to form the first single-celled organism, and then they think somehow or other those single-celled organisms began to combine with each other and form multicellular organisms, and gradually some of them became fish, and then some of them walked up on the land and became amphibians and reptiles and primitive mammals, and some of those mammals became apes and monkeys and went into the trees, and then some of them came down out of the trees and became ape men like Australopithecus, and finally some of those ape men became human beings like us. And they want to explain human existence in a purely materialistic way, that we're just an accident of evolution. There's no real purpose to human life. We're just chemical machines in competition with other chemical machines for survival. And this generates a very materialistic concept of life, so that most people today believe that the main purpose in life is to simply produce and consume more and more material things, which generates a lot of wealth, and that wealth flows into a lot of pockets, including those of scientists who are inventing weapons of mass destruction, all kinds of destructive drugs and chemicals, all kinds of useless consumer products. And that money also goes into the pockets of governments who are taxing all that economic activity. The military likes it that they're getting so many weapons from the scientists. Industrialists like it that they're getting so many consumer products and drugs and pharmaceuticals that they can sell. So I think there's a whole system that's at stake here, not just the idea that humans are 100,000 years old. That fits into a whole system that focuses our consciousness on the purely material aspects of life, which forces us into certain patterns of activity that are benefiting certain people in society, and they want to keep things like that way. And this idea, that human beings are purely materialistic products, that we're just another kind of animal, just another kind of ape, is a key to that. Because if we had a different set of answers to these fundamental questions, who are we, where did we come from, I think it would lead in a more spiritual direction. We would begin to question, well, where does consciousness come from? How could that result from a combination of chemicals? It would make us more aware of each other as coming from the same source. It would kind of end the conflict and competition that lies at the basis of today's political and economic systems. So I think there's a lot riding on the answers to these questions, and I think that's why they want to keep these ideas intact. Because they're the key to the whole pattern of culture, economics, and politics that we've got in the world today.
If you had an opportunity to talk with Charles Darwin, if you lived when he lived, you had your theories, he had his, what would you tell him, Michael? How would you switch him over?
Well, it's kind of interesting. Some people tell me maybe I'm a reincarnation of Charles Darwin, and I've had to take birth again to correct my mistake. But, actually, I have a bit of respect for Charles Darwin because I think he's somewhat different than the people who have taken over his philosophy today and turned it into an ideology. He was a very interesting person. He left university. He didn't have a PhD. He didn't finish his undergraduate degree. He was trained actually in theology. That's what he was trained in. That's what he was studying at university. And he went on a voyage on the Beagle, and he came to certain ideas about evolution. But I think he was a genuine scientist in this sense, that I think he would have been prepared to change his ideas. He admitted that there were some problems with his theories. For example, he admitted that the fossil record really didn't support his theories. He admitted that.
And then he began to believe in God too, didn't he?
Well,
a divine
yes,
creator?
Actually,
yeah.
in the second, his book Origin of Species went into 6 editions. In the first edition, he didn't say too much about God, but in the second edition, he said, in describing his theory, there's grandeur in this view of life, where in the beginning, the creator, with a capital C, breathed life into one or a few kinds of organisms and let the rest evolve. Now, there are 2 things that he says there, one of which I agree with and one of which I don't agree with. The first is that some creator with a capital C, some kind of cosmic intelligence, was involved in the origin of life, which he says directly in his book. And it's a big embarrassment to many of the evolutionists today who want to take God completely out of the picture. So it's a big embarrassment to them. But I agree with that part of what he said. I don't believe in his theory of evolution that he outlines in the rest of the book. But I think he was a reasonable person. I think that if it was pointed out to him that after 150 years, because he wrote his book Origin of Species 150 years ago, it was published in 1859, and I think if he were able to come today and see after 150 years that so much fossil evidence has accumulated that contradicts his theory, I think he might be willing to change it. But for many of his supporters today, his theory of evolution is not so much a scientific idea, but an ideology which cannot be questioned. It's people like that who try to, his supporters today, who aren't willing to listen to evidence that contradicts their theories, who have tried to enforce a government, who have now a government-enforced monopoly, so that their ideas only can be taught in the education systems in most countries in the world, including the United States, who really object to what I'm saying. I don't think Darwin himself would object to what I'm saying. I think he'd listen, and I think he would be willing to change his ideas in the face of evidence. But many of his supporters today, they don't want to hear evidence that contradicts the theory. They try to suppress that evidence. They try to restrict those who want to speak about this evidence. For example, a couple of months ago, I was in Russia. My book, Human Devolution, was published there. And I went on a 8-city tour. In one of the cities, Yaroslavl, some scientists, professors at a university there, had invited me to speak. Okay. And at the last moment, the president of the university canceled the lecture because of pressure from outside organizations who objected to me being opposed to the Darwinian...
Really? In
theory.
Russia?
Oh, yes. Being opposed to the theory of Darwinian evolution, and because also I have a spiritual perspective on these things coming from the Vedas. They objected to that as well.
Sure. We got to get into Vedas later. That's a fascinating
But what happened was really very interesting. The president of the university canceled the lecture, but the professors arranged for me to speak in an auditorium right next to the university. And when it came time for the lecture, it was packed with hundreds of students and professors from the university. And the professors who organized the lecture said it was probably more people came to hear me after the lecture was canceled by the university president than would have come if the lecture had gone on as scheduled at the university itself. So you get that kind of opposition from those who have taken, this Darwinian theory of evolution, not just as some scientific idea that could be proved or disproved, but as an ideology, practically a new religion that can't be challenged.
Okay, now I'm not going to ask you yet about the possibility of us being genetically altered by those above, but if we did not evolve from apes, how did this progression of us occur? I mean, did we just start? I mean, what happened here?
Well, people began to ask me that question after they read the book Forbidden Archaeology, where I present all this archaeological evidence that shows human beings have existed for tens of millions, hundreds of millions of years, going right back to the beginning of the history of life on Earth. And, of course, that evidence contradicts, the standard Darwinian theory that, we evolved from more primitive ape-like creatures, and before that there were just simple mammals, and before that reptiles, before that fish, before that just chemicals. So people began to ask, okay, if you don't think we evolved from the apes, then where did we come from? And I tried to answer that question in my latest book, Human Devolution. But what I propose there is that before we even ask that question, where did human beings come from, we should first of all ask the question, what is a human being? I mean, we should know what it is we're trying to explain. Now, today, many scientists are going to say, well, we're just a combination of chemicals. That's what a human being is. But I propose that if we carefully look at all the evidence that comes to us from science, we're going to see it's more reasonable to say that a human being is a combination of three things. Ordinary matter, chemicals, yes, that's part of what a human being is. But beyond that, there's a subtle mind substance with very unusual powers of telepathy, telekinesis, all kinds of strange powers. And then beyond that, there's a conscious self that can exist completely apart from the body. And this suggests to me that we exist in a multi-level cosmos where we have one level dominated by ordinary matter, another level dominated by these more subtle elements inhabited by beings adapted to the conditions there, and then beyond that, a level of pure consciousness. And that's where I think we start out. We start out as beings of pure consciousness. And if we depart from that level, and we could talk about the reasons for that, but if we depart from that level, then we need a vehicle. Just like as human beings, we're normally meant to live on the land. So if we want to go into an alien element like water, we need a vehicle that will allow us to function there. We need a submarine or a diving suit or something like that. So when a pure conscious self comes down to this level of ordinary matter, it needs a vehicle, a body that will allow it to function there. And there are different kinds of bodies. There are bodies of plants, animals, human beings, ape men, apes and monkeys. So those vehicles are, I believe, designed by higher intelligences to allow a conscious self to function in different ways in the realm of matter where we find ourselves now. So that's where I think the human form came from. I think it's designed to allow a conscious self to function in a certain way in the realm of matter. But different conscious selves have different desires, so they get different vehicles.
Well, and that makes sense. That at least gives us a foundation here for why we are. And you know what? It's not a bad theory, Michael.
Well, I think it's pretty rational in the sense that, we all have something to do with vehicles. Where do vehicles come from? Where do our cars come from? Well, why do we have cars? Well, we have cars because there are people who understand that there are conscious beings who want to move around in certain ways, so they design different kinds of vehicles for them. And they're some people, they prefer to drive around in cars. Some people want to fly around in airplanes. Some people want to ride on the water in boats. Some people want to go under the water in submarines. So you've got companies, intelligent people with engineers and designers who design different kinds of vehicles for different kinds of people who have different needs, different incomes, different tastes. And it's very obvious. We see it all around us. So I think it's not too far of a stretch to imagine that there are higher kinds of engineers existing at higher levels of the cosmos who are capable of designing vehicles for conscious selves to function in, such as bodies of human beings, bodies of ape men, bodies of apes and monkeys, bodies of plants and animals. I do think there is a kind of evolution, and that would be the evolution of the conscious self through the different kinds of vehicles or bodies in the course of reincarnation.
If mankind is indeed hundreds of millions of years older than most people and most scientists believe, does that prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that we did not evolve in the Darwinian way?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. And I deliberately, in my book, Forbidden Archaeology, did not propose any alternative theory. I just put the evidence that contradicts the current theory because I wanted people to be free to think about this and come up with their own explanations. And I saved my own personal idea, my own personal alternative idea for another book that I wrote, Human Devolution. But people have proposed all kinds of things. They've proposed perhaps a new theory of evolution where human beings evolved much earlier than scientists now think possible. Some have proposed that human beings came to Earth from outer space, the extraterrestrial idea, or they've proposed various kinds of extraterrestrial interventions in the history of life on Earth. And they've even proposed time travelers as a way to explain this evidence, people coming from the future into the past. So there are a lot of different ideas out there, and I think that's healthy. I think it is really healthy that people are thinking about a lot of different alternative ideas. And I've offered my idea, this human devolution idea, namely that the conscious self descends from some higher level of the cosmos and it's embodied in a certain way, and the purpose of human life is really to go back, to that original level of pure consciousness or spirit, if you like that word. But I think it's really healthy that people are thinking about this in different ways, and I encourage them to do that.
Michael, we'll continue, of course, talking about human devolution, but, of course, one of the first steps is Forbidden Archaeology and also your original book, The Hidden History of the Human Race, where you have described some truly incredible, absolutely remarkable stories where you prove that mankind could be around for hundreds of millions of years. So when we come right back with Michael Cremo, we'll get into that. I mean, some of these stories are absolutely riveting. Michael's websites are located and linked up at coasttocoastam.com right now. We'll be right back with him, Michael Cremo. And our special guest, Michael Cremo. Lots more with Michael Cremo. By the way, the After Dark newsletter is available to you. You get 13 issues for the price of 12. All you have to do to order is call 1-888-727-5505 or go online at coasttocoastam.com. We're with Michael Cremo. I'm George Norrie. This is Coast to Coast AM. Michael, what evidence, what things are out there that have led you to believe that mankind could be hundreds and hundreds of millions of years old?
Well, there's the reports in the different scientific journals of the past 150 years that show that scientists all over the world have discovered human bones, human artifacts, and human footprints that are many, many millions of years old. I mean, we could start out with some of the oldest ones.
Sure.
For example, there was a scientific journal called The Geologist. It's published here in the United States. It told in an article published in the year 1862 that a human skeleton was found 90 feet below the surface of the ground in Macoupin County in the state of Illinois. And according to this report, above the skeleton was a thick layer of slate rock that was unbroken. And that's an important detail because it means the skeleton cannot have come down from some higher, more recent level. And the report also said that there were medical doctors present who examined the bones and said that they were of the human type. They weren't any kind of ape man or any other kind of animal. They were physically of the human type. Now, we got in touch with geologists of the state of Illinois, and we asked them, well, how old is that layer below the slate rock at that place? We didn't tell them what was found. them a human skeleton had been found, they might have just not answered, the letter.
Right.
So we very carefully described the location, the formations that were there, and they said the age of the formation below the slate rock at that place is about 300 million years, which is before the time of the dinosaurs even. So there you have a human skeleton found in layers of rock about 300 million years old, with no possibility at all that the skeleton could have come down from some higher, more recent level. And we could also consider the case of the shoe print, that was found near Antelope Springs, Utah, by William Meister. And he found that in the year 1968. He was a researcher, a collector of fossils, and he was breaking open pieces of slate rock at this place, Antelope Spring. And when he broke open one piece of rock, he found a shoe print. My co-author, Richard Thompson, went to visit William Meister in Utah, and he was able to see this specimen. He was able to take photographs of it, and we did a computer analysis, and we showed that the shape of this impression in the rock is exactly like that of a shoe print. And if you look at your shoe, at the bottom of the shoe, you can usually see where your heel is worn down in a certain place.
Yep.
So this print had that same feature in it, and also crushed in the middle of the footprint was the fossil of a trilobite. Now, a trilobite is a kind of shellfish that existed about 500 million years ago in what's called the Cambrian period. So, okay, we've got human skeletons that are hundreds of millions of years old. We have a human shoe print that is hundreds of millions of years old. And then we also have various human artifacts that are hundreds of millions of years old. Probably the oldest are the round
these are great. This is a great story. Yeah, go ahead.
That come from South Africa, from a mine at a place called Ottosdal in the western Transvaal region. And these objects are about 1 or 2 inches in diameter. They have parallel grooves that go around the center of each one of them. They're made of a kind of iron called hematite, which is considered even today to be a semi-precious stone. You can go to jewelry stores and buy jewelry made of hematite. So they're very interesting objects. Metallurgists who've examined them say they can't explain how they could have formed naturally in the layers of the earth, especially the parallel grooves that go around the center of each object. And to me, that suggests, well, there must have been someone with human-like intelligence that manufactured these things, but they're found in layers of rock over 2 billion years old, which to me is really quite amazing. So you've got cases of human artifacts, hundreds of millions of years old, human skeletons, hundreds of millions of years old, human footprints or shoe prints, hundreds of millions of years old. And then it doesn't stop there. These discoveries continue into more recent times as well, and we could talk about more of them if you like.
Yeah, we will. And Michael, do we know, or can you even deduce what the technology or intelligence factor might have been of these humans millions of years ago? I mean, where are the buildings? Where are the computers? Where are the cars? Where are the airplanes?
Well, I think what I've discovered is just the tip of the iceberg, really. But what we're talking about when we consider the kinds of questions that you're asking is, what is the level of civilization of these humans? What was the level of their culture? What was the level of their technology? But whether we're talking about human beings of high culture or high technology or low technology, the very first thing is human beings like us have to be present. And I think I've demonstrated at least that. And then to go on further, to look at the history of these people over these vast periods of time, the different levels of culture and technology that they had, I think is a topic for future research.
Sure.
But you do get some interesting hints of things. For example, there was a case in the United States, and again in the state of Illinois, where they were drilling an artesian well. They had gone down about 200 feet, and they brought up a copper object that appeared to be some kind of coin. It was a round copper object. On one side, there was a human figure, some human figures, and some unknown script. And as I said, it came from a place in Illinois called Lawn Ridge, over 100 feet deep. And in the original report, which comes from a researcher from the Smithsonian Institution, a man named William Dubois, he gave the drilling record, that at this place, you go down through 10 feet of yellow clay, 44 feet of blue clay, et cetera, et cetera. So we gave that drilling record to some geologists of the state of Illinois, and we asked them, how old are the deposits at the level that the coin came up from? Of course, we didn't mention the coin, because that would tip them off and probably cause them not to answer our question. But we just asked them, how old is the formation at that level? It was about, they said between 200,000 and 400,000 years old. Now that's kind of amazing, because according to standard histories, coins did not come into existence until about 3,000 or 4,000 years ago in Asia Minor, in what's now Turkey, a country called Lydia. And to have this kind of evidence at over 200,000 years really is very amazing, because if you have a coin, that means you have to have some kind of government system. You have to have some kind of economic system going on. So that was pretty amazing. And I think, if we're going to talk about other things, for example, maybe millions of years ago, people had laptop computers, for example.
If that technology had evolved. I mean, because you're right. Even if mankind, let's say, was 100 or 200 million years older than what we are now, it's very possible that they didn't have the kind of technology that I thought they would with their devolution.
Yes, I mean, that's possible. We have to consider that even just in recent history.
And then again, we could have had civilizations with incredible abilities, as we'll talk about when we get into the Vedas, of course. But what do you think might have happened before we get into also some of these other cases? What do you think, even if mankind 200 million years ago stayed at a relatively primitive, like 1000 BC type person, what happened to them? Was there a calamity that wiped them out?
To me, the evidence suggests that there have been periodic catastrophes that have devastated the Earth, after which the Earth has had to have been repopulated. And this is something that, the Greek philosophers Plato and Aristotle said in their writings, that human civilizations have come and gone many times in the history of the Earth. It's something that the Vedas also say, that human civilizations have come and gone many times in the history of life on Earth. And actually, these ancient Sanskrit writings go even further, and they describe that there have been 6 major devastations in the history of life on Earth in the course of cyclical time. They say we're now in the 7th cycle, and before that there have been 6 cycles. And between each of these cycles, which are called manvantars, there have been devastations, after which the Earth has had to have been repopulated. And it's interesting, I find, that according to modern paleontology, they say there have been 6 major extinction events in the history of life on Earth, the most recent being the catastrophe that wiped out the dinosaurs when they say some asteroid struck the Earth and caused a lot of devastation. So, from what I can see, there have been periodic devastations that have wiped out the human civilizations on Earth. And then people will ask, well, then how do they get started again? And I would say they get started again from the higher levels of the cosmos that aren't affected by these devastations that take place on our level. You have higher intelligences who are able to repopulate the Earth after these periodic devastations that take place.
But they're not totally devastated then. You have some communities, some civilizations that somehow hide, survive. I guess we lucked out.
Yes, or I think it could be that they exist at higher levels of the cosmos, other planets, different systems that aren't affected by the cycles of time that affect us down on our level.
And they somehow reseed us?
Yes, I think that's how it works. But that these higher beings reseed the Earth with life forms.
On purpose?
Yes, because there is a purpose for everything. And the purpose is to convince us as conscious beings that this level of reality that we're on now is not our real home. It's temporary.
Right.
It's not where we're meant to be. And therefore, if you look at the great wisdom traditions of the world, all of them, they usually have some system of meditation or yoga or contemplation or some kind of mystical or esoteric discipline that is meant to raise consciousness back to its original level where it's beyond all the kinds of disturbances that we experience on the level that we find ourselves now.
Michael, if that's possible, let's say that we were seated because they believe, that's their responsibility. Might the ancients of the time have confused those ETs for gods?
Well, I don't think that the two things are mutually exclusive. I think there can be ETs. I think there can also be gods.
I agree.
And so that's one difference I have with some of the researchers in this field.
But we're dealing with the interpretation of these primitive people.
Yes, some of them might think like that. Just like today, if somebody goes somewhere with all our advanced technology and communications equipment, they might think, yes, we're gods of some sort. But that doesn't exclude the possibility that there really are gods of the kind that people have always believed in. I think there could be people like us on other planets that had advanced technologies that allowed them to travel from planet to planet to planet. But to me, that doesn't mean there can't also be higher beings of a more subtle nature that really deserve the name, gods or goddesses and things like that. I think both things actually exist. It seems to me that when many people think about these questions, they're looking for a simple answer of some kind, either a simple creation account where God just, there's one God who just makes everything out of nothing really quick, or a very simple evolution account where life comes from chemicals, the chemicals combine together, they form multicellular organisms, fish, amphibians, reptiles, mammals, human beings, or they're looking for a very simple ET account. But I think the real story is much more complex, and I think it involves all of these things. I think it involves some kind of overall conscious being who's responsible for the whole thing. I think it also has an extraterrestrial element to it, because I think there's life in all planets at all levels of the cosmos. And I think there's also a kind of evolution involved, but not the kind that Darwin talked about, more of an evolution of consciousness, an evolution of the soul passing through different forms of life. becoming more and more aware. So the actual story may be more complex, but more interesting tapestry than many people now imagine.
Michael, we won't have time for another case, but I want to get a few more caseloads. Next hour, we'll also talk about the Vedas. And then with this devolution, is science beginning to agree with this?
Well, yes, I think we have to keep in mind that scientists are not monolithic. I mean, you may have some old fogies out there, strict materialists, reductionists, but you've got a whole new younger generation of scientists in their 20s and 30s with tattoos and body rings and who grew up watching the X-Files on television and listening to Coast to Coast.
Yeah.
And so the world of science is actually not so monolithic. There is an
on Friday, they shut down their schools and sent 90,000 kids home because a couple of buildings, not schools, but one store collapsed and killed people in the store. And they really hadn't been watching, I guess, but their schools had snow on them measuring from 6 feet deep to 9 feet deep. And all it would have taken is a little bit of rain to put weight on those, and there would have been some disasters. So it's happening. Right now, Montreal is within 13 inches of breaking its all-time record for the amount of snow.
Outside of St. Louis, where I'm headed soon, the Merrimack River is threatening towns. Eureka Valley Park, I know those areas well. I mean, these people can't sustain too much more water in these areas.
No, George, there's another thing that I'm really concerned about. In my book, one of the things I say is that we'll be fighting in the streets for food long before we're covered with ice. And I'm beginning to see more and more occasions where food supplies. Well, look at China this year. My gosh, China in the last month has had 485,000 houses collapse because of the weight of the snow. They've had their food supplies destroyed. My understanding is, in South America and Ecuador, is that the banana supplies are gone. It's just happening around the world, not just here.
Well, what's going to happen? Because we can't fix it. We can't change it.
No.
What do we do?
Well, you were mentioning earlier, I heard you talking about some legislator wants to raise gasoline taxes.
John Dingell out of Michigan.
How crazy. Right when we're going to need it the most. Of course, we're still being told it's global warming. Just two days ago, the United Nations, the IPCC, came out saying that the ice and...
From the City of Angels off the Pacific Ocean, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be across the nation, around the world. I'm George Norrie, and welcome to Coast AM. Next hour, Forbidden Archeology and Human Devolution with Michael Cremo. Get ready for that. While residents of low-lying towns stacked sandbags or grabbed belongings and evacuated as a foot of rain pushed rivers over their banks in the nation's midsection, at least 13,000 deaths have been linked to the weather, and 3 people were missing. Record or near-record flood crests forecast in several towns in Missouri. Flooding was reported in large areas of Arkansas and parts of southern Illinois, southern Indiana, and southwestern Ohio. In a moment, we bring in Robert Felix, the author of Not by Fire, But by Ice. He still believes we are in the beginning stages of an ice age. A Michigan congressman wants to put a 50-cent tax on every gallon of gasoline to try to cut back on your consumption. Polls show that a majority of Americans support policies that would reduce greenhouse gases. But when it comes to paying for it, it's a different story. Representative John Dingell of Michigan wants to help cut consumption with a gas tax, but some just don't agree with this idea, according to a new poll. The poll, scheduled to be released on Thursday, shows that 48% don't support paying even a penny more. 28% would pay up to 50 cents more, and 10% would pay more than 50 cents, and then the rest, 8%, would pay more than $1. A new statement attributed to al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden condemns European countries for siding with the United States in Afghanistan and for allowing the publication of cartoons considered insulting to Islam's prophet, Muhammad. Mocking Islam's founder violates, they say, the etiquettes of dispute and fighting, warned the voice attributed to bin Laden. He said Muslims have not responded by mocking Jesus, whom they consider a prophet as well. Analysis of
cartoon controversy.
He seems to be implying, Douglas, that something is looming over the horizon.
Yes, indeed. A rather cryptic statement he issued, saying that it's not going to be what will be heard, but what we will see. In other words, there is some sort of indication that the reckoning for this will be more severe, he states. But there's an indication here of some sort of perhaps attack in the works or attacks in the works because of this, purportedly because of the controversy of the cartoons.
All right, Douglas, thanks for the update. Appreciate it, my friend. Douglas Hagman. A carbon-containing molecule has been detected for the very first time on a planet outside of our solar system. The organic compound methane was found in the atmosphere of a planet orbiting a star some 63 light-years away. Water has been found in its atmosphere, but scientists say the planet is far too hot to support life. This discovery, unveiled in the journal Nature, is an important step towards exploring new worlds that might be more hospitable. Methane, made up of carbon and hydrogen, is the simplest possible organic compound. In New York, the mastermind of a scheme to plunder corpses from funeral homes in the Southeast and then sell them for millions of dollars has pleaded guilty in a deal that could send him to prison for more than 5 decades. The 44-year-old former oral surgeon confessed to the judge that he carried out the scheme from 2001 to 2005. He will face 18 to 54 years and will have to forfeit nearly $5 million. He pleaded guilty to 14 counts that include enterprise corruption, body stealing, and reckless endangerment. The plea was made more than 2.5 years after the gruesome scandal broke, with evidence that corpses were being hacked up without permission or proper screening for diseases and sold for dental implants, knee and hip replacements, and other procedures around the country. And if you think it's tough here for health care, things are really bad everywhere else. A German retiree is taking a hospital to court after she went in for a leg operation and ended up, and I kid you not, with a new rectum. The woman woke up to find out that she had been mixed up with another patient who was suffering the other problem. The clinic in Bavaria has since suspended the surgical team. Now the woman is planning to sue the hospital. She still needs the leg operation and is searching for another hospital to do it. And also in other stories, too, you hear a woman who had a cancerous kidney went to get it replaced. Doctors took out the healthy kidney by mistake. Unbelievable. Well, in a moment, Robert Felix joins us, not by fire, but by ice. He's next on Coast to Coast AM. Well, you know him as the author of the book, Not by Fire, but by Ice, Robert Felix. Wonderful guest here on Coast to Coast. Hello, Robert. How are you?
Hi, George.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you for having me on.
So what's going on in the Midwest, Robert? Severe weather these days.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah, the flooding is there and the record snow. The amount of snow this winter has been phenomenal. We've had record snow in Wisconsin and in Ohio, in Indiana, in Michigan, record snow in Kentucky and Vermont and New Hampshire, California, Pennsylvania, Alaska. I mean, it goes on and on.
I thought we were in global warming.
Well, I guess you know what I think of that, but
Yeah.
No, this is what I've been saying for years. It's coming, and it's beginning to get a little bit scary out there.
And there's severe weather this time, Robert. I mean, Atlanta over the weekend, Friday starting, hit with tornadoes downtown. I mean, just an incredible situation. All throughout the country these days. 5 people die in a highway wreck and heavy rain in Kentucky. Searchers in Missouri looking for bodies. 13 deaths, maybe more reported. The Missouri governor seeks federal disaster aid. 70 counties declared a disaster area. I mean, this is tough stuff.
It is, and in Montreal, we don't hear much about Canada, but Montreal.
Previous statements has indicated that bin Laden was the speaker, and a U.S. intelligence official said no reason to think the recorded voice was not bin Laden. President Bush used the 5th anniversary of the start of the war in Iraq to make the case for persevering in a conflict that could have many more anniversaries. Democrats accused him of lacking a strategy to win and withdraw. The president, speaking before members of the armed forces and defense officials at the Pentagon, said in his frankest acknowledgement that the costs of the war in lives and money had been higher and longer lasting than he had anticipated. But he remained unwavering in his insistence that the invasion of Iraq, which began in March of 2003, had made the world better and the United States safer. However, according to the most recent poll just released, 5 years after the U.S.-led invasion of Iraq, President Bush now faces extremely low approval ratings as he reaffirmed his commitment to accept no outcome but victory in the war. Just 31% of Americans approve of how President Bush is handling his job. Douglas Hagman, Homeland Security U.S., not part of Homeland Security, on the line with us as we talk about this issue. And, of course, another new voice message in from probably bin Laden. Douglas, do you think?
I do believe so, George. Thanks for having me on your program.
Sure thing.
Indeed, a 5-minute, 3-second audio recording was released today of Osama bin Laden through or by Al-Sahab Media Productions, the media wing of Al-Qaeda, and it certainly sounds like bin Laden. Unique in timing, though, I would say, from an investigative standpoint, and if one would look at this like a criminal case, I find the timing interesting, and I find the content of the message rather interesting as well. Whereas he takes this moment in time, the 5th anniversary of the U.S.-led coalition in Iraq, to mention or to make topic about the Danish